Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for BB Dubai. She's a limited 5-star moon cancer introduced in Ordeal Call 3, Archetype Inception. This was originally chosen as a stream bonus goal by one Mr. Dahonic, and my original plan was to get this out really early. As you may have surmised, that didn't pan out. I blame Richard and Edmund. But I did bring back an old special something. With all that said, let's ask the real questions. Does the world need a third boss baby? No. But is she good? Well, let's take a closer look. One of Buster Blader's big gimmicks centers on her ability to apply traits to allies and enemies alike. The party half of this equation is applied by urban remodeling. This gives a party arts buff and 20% battery, and it also applies the Protectee status to your frontliners, excepting herself. And specifically for servants that are moon cancers or living humans, they get 3 turns of NP damage and NP gain. While there are servants who are both moon cancers and living humans, they don't gain any special advantage, so no double dipping. As a moon cancer, Black Betty herself is a valid recipient for these buffs too. Pretty much everything aside from becoming a Protectee. So what are the benefits of being a Protectee? There's just one, really. Blonde Blazer has an overcharge effect to give charge to Protectees on our alternative Noble Phantasm. Alternative? Hold that thought. The other half of Bodybag's trade application shtick comes from Lagrange Luxury. This is an AoE buff purge with a single turn of an immense 100% attack down debuff. Hitting this on an enemy has the same effect as reaching 100% defense on your team. No damage happens. It has 3 turn benefits too, arch resistance down and the application of a non-Protectee debuff. Big Barda gets additional damage on her default Noble Phantasm against enemies with this trait. Lastly, it buffs moon cancers and living humans with 3 turns of star generation and crit damage. This is a very busy skill set, and we're not even done yet. Thankfully, Golden Lunar Metropolis takes it easy on the effect text. It's 1 turn of cooldown reduction for Britbong, a 50% battery, and it offers you a choice between using BlazBlue's offensive or defensive Noble Phantasm for 3 turns. If you don't use it, she defaults to her offensive NP. That would be Calamity Continuum Chronophantasma. No, wait. Cosmos Craft Crater. This is an AoE arch attack that preemptively grants Bamboozling Beeble anti-heaven and star attribute damage. It's a small amount of both, unfortunately, but because they're power mods, they splash onto our regular cards for the rest of the turn. After the hit, it reduces their arch resistance. Where you get some extra gas though is from the overcharge effect. This gives her super effective damage against non-Protectees, so it only applies to her Noble Phantasm. It starts at the expected 150% for super effective NPs and scales up to 200%. Modest, but any overcharge you get onto Blast Burn is still pure profit. The good news is that arts teams are quite effective at going into overcharge chains thanks to Castoria, and if necessary, Lady Avalon's assistance. The bad news is that your game plan hinges on having access to Lagrange Luxury, which is on a 6-turn cooldown. Worse yet, it's a one-off debuff, which comes with many headaches. First of all, non-Protectee can be cleansed off, resisted, or simply blocked outright depending on your enemy. This adds another condition to a servant whose non-generic use case is already very narrow. Secondly, this arrangement makes Bling Boy's 3-turn farming damage highly inconsistent. Now it doesn't come with any other loop-relevant utility, so you can at least hold it for Wave 3. But this does mean that thicker Wave 2 mid-bosses pose a serious threat to your clear. There's a very hacky way around this, which is to run Binding Blade with another Blazing Blade. This way you can have them use Lagrange Luxury on 2 separate waves so you can have more consistent damage. And both barrels does have, on paper, a reasonably good multi-core skill set. As moon cancers, the 2 Bistro Butchers benefit from each other's special effects on top of the generic party buffs. So you have wider coverage on multi-wave fights, and for boss encounters, you get the advantage of crippling their damage on 2 separate turns. Better yet, you can mix and match their Noble Phantasms to adapt to whatever situation you're in. Speaking of the other NP, that would be Gold Gigant Garment. This provides a series of party buffs, 1 turn of invulnerability and debuff immunity, 3 turns of party NP damage tied to Bakugan Brawler's NP level, and its overcharge effect grants charge to allies with Protectee status, 30% at OC1, and going up 5% with each additional overcharge level. It's a useful effect package in a vacuum, but one with some notable drawbacks. The biggest one is that you can only have this up in 3-turn rotations, after which Bonsai Bill defaults back to CCC. For a single bubble butt that has to carry your team's defensive burden, that's a huge issue. In the sorts of boss fights where GGG would be a reasonable play in the first place, you're either stuck with this for 3 turns, or you don't have access to it for the next 3 to 6 turns. This eats into Bonebreaker's on-paper flexibility. Think of one of those really messy fights where your main attacker goes down, or Castoria takes a dive, and all that's left between you and eating a big AoE is Birthday Bash. You can swap to GGG to save your team, but look, you're coming up on a break bar or you took too long and the boss got another NP. If that second crisis lines up with your downtime, you're fucked. It's here that I wish FGO had a mechanic that lets you switch when you select your NP, instead of having it on a skill. Maybe like a 4th command card or something. It's a persistent issue with NP switchers like Blue Beetle and Summer Barghest. But you don't need perfect coverage when you have someone like Castoria, right? True, and that brings me to issue number 2. Castoria is such a ridiculously overtuned support that not only does almost every, if not every Arcs attacker run with her as a matter of course, but she provides protection in a fairly exploitable way. All you need to do is sequence your NPs to overcharge her. The fact that she's the meta art support means that in teams where you find Barbarian Bully, you'll almost certainly find Castoria as well. When both are on the field at the same time, this makes GGG seem like an act of self-sabotage. Why convert your attacker into a support when the ideal support is right there? Now, there might be situations where the debuff immunity takes precedence or Castoria doesn't have enough charge, and then yeah, it makes sense to switch. But for the most part, supportive Booty Bandit feels redundant when things are going according to plan. If they aren't, she has a valid use case. She can pivot to stem the bleeding from a downed Castoria and can even nullify a big enemy turn with Lagrange Luxury, especially if she's coming in from the backline and hasn't committed any of her skills yet. But I feel the need to emphasize that these sorts of shit-your-pants situations happen the least often for proper Arts teams. They have a depth of defensive plays ranging from Castoria Overcharge to Lady Avalon's de facto healing and even the humble Jufu sacrifice courtesy of Outrage. If she were a Buster Servant, I think there might be a case for running her as a true flex, since you can cut down her cooldowns with Koi and Skaya. That and Buster teams usually have very poor defensive coverage outside of Merlin, but in an Arts team, you're asking for trouble. Yeah, you can get a head start on her cooldowns with a Pen 5, though I'd personally recommend a Pen 2 as a higher priority, and Arts teams do have access to original recipe Tamamo if they really want to push cooldown reduction. But now you have too many cooks in the kitchen. That's potentially 3 defensive servants, all begging for more charge to keep their combo up, and 9 times out of 10, you'd be better off just focusing on Castoria and using the Immortal team. The fact that Bilbo Baggins can wear so many hats in the first place is an impressive feat, even if none of them are filled with chowder. But the fact is that there's always some catch. She's never operating at full power, or if she is, she needs her debuff to hit, and she can't be responsible for 2 high health waves in a row. Defensively, you're hamstrung by her cooldowns, and the fact that GGG isn't her default Noble Phantasm. She's helpful in fights where something goes wrong, since her kit can adapt to plug a gap, but regardless of how you play her, it's a temporary fix. And as a matter of grand strategy, I'd rather build my account to execute any game plans I come up with, rather than assume I'll inevitably fuck it up, even though that's what usually happens. As an attacker, Betty Boop is stuck in another unflattering situation. I've already talked about her relying on a debuff that she can only use on a single wave, Summer Kama Syndrome, but there's also the issue of AoE Moon Cancers not being the best attackers in the first place. Wait a second, Fino, you're a huge Arquade friend, right? A, I'd grail Arquade even if she were a pile of garbage. I did it for Shootin'. Twice. B, she has 2 things that make her highly desirable as an attacker. A 100% battery with an abusable cooldown, and an anti-buff against a very common alignment that scales with her NP level. That's the kind of power you need to rock it as an offensive Moon Cancer. Again, Bastard Bonds has a good, packed skill set, but to what end? She's a generalist at the expense of creating a true niche for herself, and I think the most painful part is that, with the double Bunker Buster team, I can see that they got very close to the magic recipe, letting the 2 synergize with each other for more consistent damage, charge, and debuff coverage. You know how I can tell? That's because they actually do get it right later this year. Double Khazra drop teams are a legitimate terror, and that's because Khazra drops don't just cover for each other's weaknesses like the Beetleborgs, but they cascade off each other. In the presence of another extrovert Sakura, Khazra drops 50% battery becomes a 100% battery. And as you may have surmised, the second KD counts for this purpose. Moreover, Khazra drop is just as debuff reliant as Bad Breath, but unlike Bible Black, her debuff procs 3 times, essentially once per turn while it's up. If Best Buddy's non-Protect T worked like this, not the 100% attack down, just the trade application, that'd be a huge buff, and one that could at least put her in the conversation for being an ultra-generalist attacker, even though Space Aresh would probably still take the crown. Outside of Double Barnum and Bailey, her Moon Cancer and Living Human synergies are a bit strained. A substantial number of those servants are AoE attackers to begin with, and while some of them are quite strong like Tezcat, they're usually better served by running with dedicated meta supports or single-target complements. Even a lot of the single-target servants would pass on the team-up, but there are some notable oddballs that can work with Beacon Bolt. Summer Shiki Ryogi is a Moon Cancer who's coming next year. She can swap between her single-target and AoE NPs, so in a fight where you have an excuse to run both, you can have Shiki go between attacking methods, and Battle Bond swap between her AoE and defensive NPs to adapt to a changing fight. And speaking of Shiki, a low econ player could run Battle Beast with Assassin Shiki, who they can obtain from the Evocation shop. Mash fits the bill for a Living Human, and after a deal call 4, she swaps between a defensive and offensive Noble Phantasm, so you could have her in Breakblade switch rolls as needed to keep your defenses high and your enemies suppressed. Like the rest of her kit, Ujingi Boar's passives also cast a wide net, adding to the Yu-Gi-Oh card-esque wall of text. She gets 25% debuff resistance from both Magic Resistance EX and Goddess's Essence. Future Management provides 20% crit resist chance and star absorption. Then she has a pair of Humanity Assessment passives. The offensive one gives her 10% bonus damage against non-servants and all enemies with either an evil alignment or an anti-good damage modifier. The defensive counterpart gives Bikini Bottom 20% defense against lawful alignments, servants, and enemies with anti-evil damage. One particular quirk with Blossoming Bogbeast is that she needs Moonlight Nuclei to level up her append skills. This is an item introduced in Archetype Inception, and it doesn't have a valid farming node until you complete that chapter, which itself is time-gated. Consequently, there's going to be a gap of just under a month between the start of Batman Beyond's banner and the earliest point you can get replacement materials. So the ones you get from the story? Make good use of them. Regarding equipment, your craft essence options are pretty straightforward. Black Rail is the expected best in slot for arts attackers, but if you want to give a supportive, baked bean build-a-shot, consider Prisma Cosmos for more reliable access to GGG or Fragment of 2030 for crit star income. Personally, I'd use a generic 50% CE like Golden Sumo or Ocean Flyer if I'm using branded banishment from the backline. This lets her go straight into GGG without external help. Anti-evil command codes like Sparrow's Din's Proprietress are nice for drawing out some more damage from her passive. It also helps that her favorite targets are Avengers, with most non-event variants being evil aligned. For something more generic, try the other Da Vinci command code, the one with Rider Da Vinci. This gives party-wide NP damage so you have more flexibility, even when you swap to GGG. On paper, Bran Bronzebeard is a highly flexible attacker that can cripple enemies during a Noble Phantasm turn, but also switch into a defensive configuration if she needs to hunker down for longer. And offensively, being able to give a 70% charge to herself and 20% to her teammates does have its team-building benefits. And of course an anti-buff where she can apply it herself. Sounds like a pretty good deal. But everything Brazen Bull does comes with a catch, and consequently, she rarely turns out to be the ideal solution for a given situation. I have a lot of 120s on my JP account, and there are times where I've had eureka moments and thought, yes, this is the perfect fight for Kukul Khan, or Melusine, Lancer not ruler. But I've almost never thought, Batlin Boxer is the only way. She's a servant that plies her trade on being able to fill multiple roles by herself, but this is a strength that wanes as your account develops. The upfront cost of getting your NP levels up to par doesn't justify the expense. If your account lacks breadth and you're relatively new, there's a hypothetical case for going into someone like Boombox. But to compound her woes, Bad Blood has the problem of being a good servant at a time of the year when she's up against a pair of all-time greats. For AoE purposes, Space Aresh is both a useful multi-core attacker and someone who scales well in long fights. Better yet, her primary threat comes from her NP, so she's not as hamstrung by cooldowns as Blockbuster. And CL expands the capabilities of your roster while being a formidable attacker if you choose to commit. Turns out 2026 is going to be a big year for Bonzi Buddy. Just not this one. Thanks for watching, lads. Is there a servant you'd like to see a guide for? Let me know in the comments down below. I stream every weekend at 3 PM Pacific Time, twitch.tv/Finotaisen. If you're watching this the week it comes out, I'll be running for this video's namesake on Sunday, and I'll probably make some awful deal with chat to double down, so stop by if you want to see how that turns out. Till next time.